Okay, okay. All right. Well, today is March 17th, and I want to welcome Joe Liggio and Natalia
Dwagon.
Dwaron. I love
Mhm.
how she says it. I love how she says it. And so we're here with the Thicket of Diversity. And Natalia is an intern that we have, and she's with the Rennes School of Business in France, which we're just thrilled to have her here. And Joe has been a member of the Thicket of Diversity and an orchid researcher for years. So we're kind of going to go over all this information and document it and kind of capture it for our history, Joe. This is what we're eager to do. So I just want to welcome both of you here, and here we go. So Natalia, I'll let you start.
Okay, well, just to get a basis,
Now I don't hear you. I
oh,
lost your voice.
hello? Can you hear me?
Unmute. Unmute.
Unmute. Hello?
Okay.
I can hear you.
You can hear
Natalia, I
me?
can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
Mm,
Um,
When I went to record, I lost your voice. Let's try again. Uh, host
hello?
tools. Participant to chat, start video, record, transcribe. Let's see. Well, we may not be able to record if it's going to do this. Let me end the recording.
Okay.
Okay, try again, Natalia. Can
Hello?
you?
It's still saying recording.
Nope,
Can you
can't
hear
hear
me?
you. All right, let's see. I'm going to,
I think it started
okay.
recording.
It says it's being recorded. All right, here we go. All
Okay.
right, take
Sorry
two.
about that.
And we'll try.
Hmm.
Okay. So we are again, this is March 17th, and this is the Thicket of Diversity. And we've been around for a while, but we're trying to capture a little history with orchid researcher Joe Liggio and Natalia, who is a very special intern from the Rennes School of Business. So, Natalia,
Hmm.
we'll let you start off.
Okay, well, just to start off, Joe, could you give us just a very basic understanding of what is an orchid and what is unusual about it?
Uh, the members of the orchid family, they're in the monocots. They're related to the lilies, and basically the structure is usually monocots. The flowering monocots have three petals and three sepals. The petals are the inner part, and the sepals are on the outside. Well, with orchids, one of the petals is modified and usually elaborate. So an orchid will have a very, usually a relatively decorated lip, which is one of the petals, the lowest petal. And it probably serves as a landing pad for pollinators, insect pollinators, and whatever. But there's, all kinds of variations. But normally, I mean, an orchid is going to have, it's going to have a really striking lip most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
orchids there's probably close to 30,000 species in the world. Most of them inhabit the tropical forest and tropical rainforest,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a significant amount, smaller portion that are terrestrial, and they practically on every continent except Antarctica. Some of them actually occur actually above the Arctic Circle. The greatest diversity is found in the tropics, though, where you have
Okay.
Colombia might have 3 or 4 thousand species.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay. Wow.
Interesting.
So we live in the big thicket of Southeast Texas. And why is our region special for orchids, Joe?
Uh, because it's kind of we are kind of we're like the most westward extension of what was called the Eastern Deciduous Forest, which is a forest like you have in the Appalachians and in the Northeast. We have all the oaks and we have beeches and a lot of the same species. And also we have what there's called the Southeastern Evergreen Forest, which is southeastern and it occurs all the way from Florida to here. And that's where we have, I mean, that's where mainly you have the longleaf pine region. And and you have other pines too, like shortleaf and loblolly. But so it's called the Southeastern Evergreen region. And we have a lot of species that are, a lot of our species uh, occur as far north as places like Nova Scotia, and some actually, like the calopodons, are actually found even in the Caribbean, like in Cuba, you find grass pink orchids. But we have west eastern species that are from the eastern U.S. And I guess the trick with orchids is that they have very tiny seeds. Of course, their seeds require a fungus, a symbiotic fungus to invade the seed to provide nutrients for when the orchid is developing, because this orchid seed is a naked seed, has no nutrients in it. And because orchids are so tiny, their seeds are so tiny, they can be dispersed over long areas, probably, by wind and maybe by birds. And but so that's why we have a lot of interesting species that they have in, the eastern U.S. because, their seeds are easily dispersed over long distances. It's not like a magnolia, it has a big seed in it. It some of those don't even make it across the Sabine River. But anyway,
Mhm.
that's it. But we have about 55 species, which is pretty high.
Okay. Okay. So when I first heard that orchids actually grew in the big thicket, I was pretty shocked by that. It just seemed like something unexpected. I didn't imagine that kind of thing. So how rare is it to find orchids in places like the big thicket? And does it require some sort of specific like conditions for it to grow, or is it just
Um,
actually more common than people think?
well, a lot of orchids apparently occur, very specialized environments. We have in the big thicket, we have these areas that are basically called seepage areas, and we call them bogs because what they're underground water seeping. It's either, like groundwater or some, water pouring out of a bluff, but this this wetness is what creates the conditions for orchids. And another thing that all of our terrestrial orchids are mostly, they require most of them require quite a bit of sunlight in there, so they have to be in open. And so our most of our orchids in the big thicket occur what's called in pine savannas or open areas. We also have orchids that grow in there have, well, some of these orchids can also be found in prairies to some extent, but they all require like these places where they grow in areas where you have a lot of what's called insect eating carnivorous plants. And like pitcher plants, we have one species of pitcher plant. We've got sundews, and we've got butterworts and bladderworts, and we have all a host of different species that grow in these wetlands that
There
are,
we go.
yeah. So
Okay, that's
there
pretty.
are there are some that are very apparently like the spring lady's tresses is called Spiranthes vernalis, and it is very widespread, and actually it's very abundant, and you actually see it on roadsides. You can actually see it in downtown Houston growing on on the medians and stuff because it's very and it's very ubiquitous. covers a large portion of the state, and it's just very wide ranging. A lot of the other orchids are very specialized and grow in just the right conditions.
I remember years ago you saw some growing. We were on a field trip and we had a school bus, and you saw some growing right there by the Sundew Trail on that road going. And we got off the bus, and there you go. So that was pretty cool. I have a picture of that. So, Natalia? Okay, unmuted again. Let's see. Wonder what happens here.
Okay, sorry, that
There
was
you go.
me.
Okay,
I had
got
the
you.
volume up and I muted it by mistake. Okay. So I wanted to ask you what first drew you to studying orchids specifically? I mean, you're mentioning other plants, but it seems like orchids are the main one. So what
Uh,
brought that up?
I was eventually, you originally, I got a biology degree out of college, and I was really not a botanist. I wasn't a specialist in botany, and a few years later, I actually took a course that was actually taught out of the museum with Robert Vines, and he rekindled my interest into into plants, and I started really getting into it, and I started going to the big thicket and reading books and photographing, going over to the photograph the unusual flowers, and orchids were always special, and so
Hmm.
I got I had a lot of pictures of orchids. And what really, I was always very interested in orchids. I had a book called it was called Orchids of North America, North of Mexico, and it was Donovan Carell, and it came out in 1950. And it was like a book, that had all these things. And I remember me and a friend of mine that always used to go. I worked with him, named David Berkshire, but he worked at Shell Oil Company, researched at where I worked, and we got to know each other, and we started going out looking at plants, and he had this orchid book, and we kind of looked at that like it was a catalog, and we'd say, "Oh, I want to see this one, I want to see that one," because they were all over, they were a lot reported from Texas. So over the years, I got to see most of them,
Hmm.
what happened, most of them that were in East Texas. And then when I met my wife, she was very impressed with my photographs and said, you probably ought to see if you can get them published. And I sent some to Texas Highways magazine. And Bill Reeves was the photo editor at Texas Highways, and he contacted me and said that he wanted to do some stuff from East Texas because he said that they didn't really have that many pictures from East Texas. There was more people going to West Texas anyway, whatever. And I said, yeah, great. And I sent him a whole bunch of my pictures, and then they looked at them and they picked out the orchids and said, why don't we do one on orchids? And I did one on, I said, that'd be great. So I had about probably 20 species. I don't know. There was probably about 10 species, that was featured and it came out in Texas Highways magazine in 1989. And
Mm.
after that time, a nature photographer named John Tweeten, who actually worked with A&M Press, he called me and said, "You got some really good orchid pictures. You really got really good wildflower pictures." He said, "We ought to do a book." And he said, "You can do the photographs, and I'll do I can write the text." And we were working on that, and we were having discussions with A&M Press. But A&M Press, they never came around, or they came around and said, "Why don't we do one on the whole U.S.?" which would be a lifetime work. And
Hmm.
I had pictures that I had submitted that were used in Texas at University of Texas Press. There was a mushroom book, and I had a lot of pictures. And Shannon Davies was the editor, one of the editors at UT Press, and she was aware that me and my wife were thinking about doing a book, and she contacted us and said, "Why don't you send a proposal?" And we did, because my wife thought that I knew a lot more about orchids than I did. I mean, I didn't know quite a bit, but I had to study, and what I did is I started going to all the herbariums. I checked all the records and read all kinds of books, and of course, luckily there was a compiled list that was done by Donovan Carell. Where he did a 1944 Orchids of Texas and
Mhm.
publication. So, I had a good start on it. So, but I contacted all these people, and I talked to people like Steve Orzel, who was working at he was one of the botanists that was working for the Natural Heritage Program, and he knew a lot of stuff and did a lot of collections. He helped me a lot, but and of course, I got a lot of information. I knew Geraldine, and there was a book called Wildflowers of the Big Thicket that had some very interesting discussions on different types of habitats. So I got really familiar with a lot of it.
Mhm.
Uh,
So,
Natalia, Joe mentioned Geraldine. That's Geraldine Watson, and she's
Yeah.
extremely famous. So that's one of the pioneers that her name will come up. But
Hmm.
so, Joe, you were one of the first ones to get involved in the Thicket of Diversity, and it was established in 2006, and we are in 2026, and we're still going. We're a small organization, but we are still going. And so, I'd like you to kind of tell us a little bit about how you first became involved with the Thicket of Diversity.
well, that's when they announced it, and of course, the idea was, they would, you know, get people to go out and do surveys and collect all this information, and that it was so everything was being compiled, and well, you know, sort of said, well, I could do the orchids, and I started really, I was to start working with the Houston Orchid Society, but that didn't really work out really that well. They were interested, and so I did a lot of work myself. But actually, before this, my book had actually come out before we started the Big Thicket of Diversity. But
Yes,
I knew Leon, I knew Paul Harcum from Rice and all these researchers, and they did a
right.
lot of collecting. But so all this stuff was compiled, and it's actually, I guess they have it at A&M University. But one thing that's happened since that time is online, these on with the internet, a lot of herbariums have have put their collections, records of their collections online. So
Mhm.
now we have a databases that have all the distribute collecting all the collecting records from all over the country, and so we have a lot of information out there that we didn't originally have in the collections, because there's more. Over the years there's been a lot. So um, but there's a Texas Oklahoma Regional Herbarium Database that's online,
Mhm.
and all the herbariums participate. They actually have some of the specimens are actually the you can actually look at photographs of the herbarium specimens too. But all this is information is there on location, like the county, time of year, what type of habitat, all that kind of stuff is there. Some is much better than others. Obviously, some of the older records were the information was kind of sparse.
Right.
But
And
now
the
we have,
standards
we
changed
have
over time, even with the TOD. We learned from experience what we needed to have. So some of our early records are not are weaker, but it's improving now because of databases and spreadsheets and standards. Go
but
ahead, Natalie.
So that kind of leads me into the next question of so talking about these herbariums and how there's so much more data on that. Um, so You mentioned about there's about 50, 54 species of orchids in the area. And so I was wondering how many of those have you like identified? Or is that number how many you've identified, or is that just like known in the total or what?
That's compiled in known records.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, well, one of the things there was a publication called Corell and Johnson. It was kind of, the flora of Texas that was originally done in about, I don't know, 65 or so. And that there was there was a lot of information on collections. I mean, there was a lot of botanists that were collected. And of course, the big thicket was always a magnet for people looking for stuff. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you were doing the research with the thicket of diversity, did you I know that you mainly, it seems like you were taking pictures of these things. So was that enough to verify it, or did you have to get other people to verify it with you, or how did that work?
I was able to identify most everything. And probably because of but when the certificate of diversity, I had already published the book.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have the book.
Okay, so yeah, that kind of.
Probably there were some, I'm sure there were a few miss IDs and miss records and stuff like that. And so
Hmm.
uh, I should probably do some updates because I have found, there's been some more species that have been found. A lot of the species that when I was working on the book, I'd look at it and there might be like a lot of them. There were a lot of collection spots for a lot of orchids, but some of them there might be only three or four from the whole state, and so I didn't always have a really good idea where to find them all. And
Mm-hmm.
and there were things like called the Texas ladies dresses, which was Spiranthes brevilabrus, and it was it was considered very, very rare. And of course, it was discovered in Texas probably a little over 2004 or something like. So that there's been some new things found, but there were a lot of these records were just so obscure. And basically I was on my own. I didn't really have any. I didn't have like a major professor that was specializing in orchids.
And
I did.
I don't think you received any grant funding either, Joe. I think you did it all. I mean, it was on your own. Some of these other groups had a little grant funding.
Oh yeah, well, and I had because of University of Texas Press, they assigned David Riskind, who was a biologist that was very, very, very knowledgeable about habitats and knew quite a bit about orchids, and he was kind of my science advisor. But I really never, I never really corresponded with other orchid experts in the United States, and I probably should have, but I read all their books, and so I studied up a lot.
Well, we were sure glad that you lent your expertise to us. I mean, we've always been really proud of it. Um,
Hmm.
We
so,
have some we have some really rare orchids too in the big thicket. It's really interesting because one of the orchid species that was, Geraldine actually thought she collected it. She thought for the first time from Kirby State Forest, and it was called a Calopogon. Uh, it was identified as Calopogon barbatus by Donovan Carell. He collected some of that, but he was wrong. Actually, a taxonomist, a student taxonomist, actually discovered this new species that was nobody had even known. I mean, they thought it was Barbados, but it had some different characteristics. But that's called Spiran. I mean, it's called Calopogon occlumensis, and Douglas Goldman from University of Texas actually described the new species. So we have the new species, and it's been really rare. And when I was working on the book, I thought it was I thought that it was Barbados until, before the book was published, and but so that was a new species that nobody even knew about,
So
and
that leads into one of my questions, and that is about documentations or publications. I don't know if we have a paper on that new species, and if you could give us a clue on that, we could look it up and add it because I think that's pretty important.
I, I'm sure I've probably got a copy of the original publication somewhere on my computer somewhere, and I could probably send you that.
Okay. We also might be able to find it on Google Scholar with the his
Yeah,
name, the researcher's name. That might be the quickest way.
Mhm.
I'm sure you could. Um, and also we had what's called we had the lady slipper orchid. We at one time it was considered Cypripedium calceolus. Well, of course, that had been reworked, and actually calceolus was really later defined as the one that occurred in Europe and not here. And well, but anyway, we had one here that we thought was Cypripedium calceolus, and then in the early mid '80s, somebody just described it as a new species. It's called Cypripedium kentuckiensis because that's where the original first collections were found, and it's a bigger, larger one. And at one time, it was probably really abundant in East Texas. Now it's very rare, but and very fortunately, we've got populations that are growing in the canyon units of the big thicket, and I think there's probably several clumps of plants, so it's really good. But it's our largest orchid too.
Mm.
It blooms in mid-April and has a beautiful yellow, you know, lip flower.
Wow, that's cool. That's really great that that's kind of got rediscovered in a way. Um, so I guess that kind of brings up the question I was going to ask, which is why do you think this work is important, or why do you want to share with people how this work is important? What do you think is something that people don't realize that you want to
Um,
share with them about orchids and this research?
the thing about orchids is because they have very specific. A lot of them have very specific requirement habitat requirements. They're specialists, and they're like, I mean, there's a hierarchy of species that are found in habitats. So an orchid is an indicator that if you have orchids, then it means you're probably got a uh, pretty healthy
Mm,
uh, biological community.
okay.
But they're rare. They're more rare. Uh, and they're probably more rare because one of the things, as I said, that they require a specific types of fungi that can invade the seed and actually start, and actually these fungi actually provide nutrients for the orchids to grow, and that's the only way they can go. But and it was kind of said what's really, you know, even Charles Darwin noted that orchids were pretty amazing, and he thought that, because they produce so many seeds, they can produce thousands and millions of seeds in a capsule, some of them.
Mm.
He said, if they were all sprouted, the whole world would be dominated by orchids, but they have a very specific habitat requirements, and they also have a specific fungus requirements. They're rare,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to protect them because I mean that they're part of the long-term biological diversity. Another thing too is I think it's important, and what's been what there's a group of orchid researchers at the Smithsonian Institute that have started a collection system where they're collecting seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Orchids, They produce millions and millions of seeds, so there's tremendous amounts of them. They found that they can store them long term. They can freeze them and they'll last forever. But the point is that orchids now they know how to grow them in the laboratory, and they can actually go back and we can reintroduce these things because they can reproduce. I mean, like I said, one orchid capsule can have hundreds of thousands of seeds. So if you just got one capsule from an orchid, you could take it into the lab and grow, a countless number of species of specimens.
Hmm.
And they're actually doing that now. Quite a.
So,
Wow.
I
Joe, I have my family on my mom's side is from Costa Rica. And so I have cousins that live in Cartago, and there is an orchid research center in Cartago that would just absolutely knock your socks off. It is amazing. It's greenhouse after greenhouse of orchids. It's so beautiful. So I can share information of that place with you. But I've been several times. Every time I go, every time I get to go to Cartago, I make a point to go there because it's just
I've been
amazing.
there.
You've been there, okay?
Maybe called Lancaster Gardens
Lancaster,
too. I
that's
don't.
it. Correct.
Yeah, I visited that, and when I was in Costa Rica with my wife, but that's before the book was even conceived.
Wow.
But
Well, it's still there. It's still there. It's wonderful. Okay, so I did want to when we I wanted to show this book, Natalia. You haven't seen it, but this is Wild
Mm.
Orchids of Texas that Joe and my book is signed by you, Joe, and Anne. I have both of you. Anne has also signed it, so it's I really treasure it. And
he was
yeah, this is part of my collection. But anyway, that's why you're known as the Orchid Man. Do you know the Orchid Man? Yes, I do. All right. Go ahead, Natalia.
Well, I think that's really interesting how you were saying about that they're kind of an indicator of the health of the biodiversity in general in the area and how they really kind of show the how good the area is, I guess. That's really fascinating. And I wanted to know if how orchids can be, oh, my light went off, how orchids can be affected by the changes in habitat. And I guess you kind of already brought that up with the with if the habitat, I guess, is not in as good health and it doesn't have the right fungus to help the seeds grow, then
also
that would be a part of it.
also that before the Texas was developed, I mean there was a lot more habitat. We Because of development, we reduced the number of habitats where I mean number of places. So these things are not as common as they once were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, things that we should be doing to kind of avoid these negative impacts, I guess, is to protect the spaces where they can grow and where they have that
And
nutrients.
quite a lot of land that's set aside, but there's still more work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the theme of Natalia's study is environmental sustainability. So she's really going to hone in on this idea of sustainability, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll work on some kind of creative project. We're not quite sure what direction this will go, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
take the information you've given us today, Joe, and try and disseminate it in some way. And we may ask to get with you again. Maybe we can even get with you in person, or um,
Yeah.
I I can If I need to do is I can go to the Torch database and I can go in there and I can look up all these things. What I need to do is sometimes now a lot of times these databases are these rare plants are protected, and rare orchids sometimes they don't have a lot of information. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not, but if I have permission to have access to all of that, then I'll have access to all the information about every collection, about every collection in the United States, and I can use that information.
Mhm.
There's some really
So
unusual stuff that's been.
basically, what we're focusing in on, and Natalia can share because she's doing much of the work. We're really trying to update our big thicket orchid list, and if you could help us get that's all we need to focus in on is big thicket because we can't do the whole thing, but if you could help us update that list, that would be great. And anything that's in that database that you're talking about would be verified because they have all the information in there. Natalia, do you have handy what what our last number was for big thicket orchids?
I think it's something really low, like 34, I believe. I know it's not more than uh I don't even think it's 50 or
No,
something. It might be 54, but it's not much.
It,
I
it's
think I
around.
have it.
It's close to 40. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I mean, we have a really good idea which ones are here. It's funny that some of the orchids that were collected by the first botanist explorers, there's one it's called Habenaria quincaceta. It was found in East Texas somewhere. No doubt it was in the big thicket. There was also another orchid that was called Cleistes divaricata, the rosebud orchid, and of course the taxonomy changed now, but there was one collection actually from Texas. And of course, there's been people debating whether that was true or not because Carell had listed that and he had said he'd seen a specimen. Well, there is a specimen. I mean, I've got that. I mean, I've seen it on the database, and I've actually seen the specimen. So, I mean, it was here, and there's been also some new discoveries, but it's like there was a yellow fringeless orchid was one that was sometimes called the golden frog arrow, beautiful little orchid. But we have three orange species of orchids that occur in the summertime, and there's the cristata, which it's a small flower and it has a fringed lip, and then there's one called ciliaris that it's a much bigger flower and has larger lip and more fringing, and those are the two that were here, and then there was another one that actually was found in the big thicket. It's called uh, Platanthera a plant Philtanthera chapmanii, and it was one that was debated. It was kind of considered people taxonomists at the time thought it was a hybrid because it was an intermediate between cristata and ciliaris because it was intermediate in size and looked, it had a fringe. Well, anyway, it turned out that was a new species. That species is very rare now. We know it's always been rare. I mean, because it only occurs in northern Florida, and there's been a few populations found in uh, Georgia. But the ones in East Texas, the Chapman's fringe, they all seem to occur in the big thicket, and they're all occur. And it's funny, we have the other ones, cristata and ciliaris. Those are usually found, further north or on older formations. So the ones that are in the big thicket it's a special species. It's like a disjunct population and there's, I mean, we have probably some of the largest populations in the world here, like at Watson Preserve, but it's really rare. But it wasn't even recognized until 1985. So, it was, but
Wow.
it's a real special one, and I
Hmm.
That's
I know an
exciting.
orchid. Mhm.
So we're going to be working on and our list. We only had 24, Natalia. So we're going to be
Okay.
working on updating this list. And I just
Mhm.
have Natalia just through the end of May. So we're gonna just have to really knock this out. And
Mhm.
but it's been wonderful what we've been able to accomplish, and it's been great visiting with you again, Joe. And you've given us quite a bit to think about and to discuss, and we just really appreciate your time and your expertise and
Mhm.
your love of orchids.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you so much.
And if you have any questions, I can start compiling a more complete list. I should go do that. And there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. A lot of collections that go back, the early
Mhm. Yeah, that would be great if you could start compiling the list. I did look at that database that you had sent, the one that's the Texas, Oklahoma. It's
80s.
Torch. Um, I did look at that, and that was really a good resource. Yeah, but if you wanted to kind of narrow down some of that, that would be great.
Well, and I really think that, we probably ought to go in that database and look for a lot of other, a lot of the rare and other unusual plants that are found in the big thicket, and we can
Hmm.
get a better understanding. But, you know, the big thicket's unique because it's like, it is kind of like a crossroads, I mean,
I'm
that's
so
said,
sorry. That is my phone. Well, folks,
but
I think maybe we'll say goodbye on this. And I have the phone is in the other room. I'm not going to answer it, but uh, this was great. And I thank you. And we'll probably get
Hmm.
back with you, Joe, a follow up.
for sure, that would be great. Be
Okay.
great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Here we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
that was too bad about my stupid phone. Oops, I'm still recording. Okay, stop
oh, it's
recording.